In response to the video that Paul and I shot when we were on the Canning Stock route about vehicle choice, there have been many comments and questions. The comments range from specific questions about what vehicle do you recommend and things like that. Again, people wanting me to come up with ideas on specific brands. So that I'm going to do that. Now, I'm going to do that at the risk of 100 million thumbs down because you don't agree with me. And that's fine. If you don't agree with me, please comment. Say you don't agree with me, but why? Why is you don't agree with me is the key, because learning from other people's experience is the key to success. And I can share with you my experience with the many vehicles. I'm on number 15 at the moment, and also traveling with other people, listening to other people, driving other people's vehicles. I've got a lot of experience and certainly have a good idea, I believe, on what works and what doesn't. Before I get to vehicle specifics, I'm going to address the question of air suspension. This is why air suspension doesn't work on an overland vehicle. Yes, it's on trucks and etc. Yes, I know that. The single most common failure on a vehicle off-road is suspension. Breakages of springs, breakages of shock absorbers. Okay? And then tire failures, punctures and things like that. Those are the two most common things. Would you consider an automatic tire? A tire that you could not fix if it gets a puncture? Of course you wouldn't. Well, that's the problem with air suspension. Do you really want to carry a spare front and rear and all the sensors that go with them? And modern vehicles with air suspension are full of sensors. The idea of being able to raise the height is very nice. Yes, I agree with you. It's very nice. But when it goes wrong, you are completely and utterly screwed. There is nothing you can do. You need advanced workshop facilities. Generally speaking, I could be very specific, but I won't be. Air suspension doesn't work with an overland vehicle purely because when it works, it's fantastic. When it stops working, you're screwed. There is nothing you can do. You cannot even tow the vehicle out. You need a flatbed. Now imagine on a really rough trail, getting a flatbed in to put the vehicle on to ship it out. Because most of these vehicles are, because they're electronic, if this air suspension fails, and it can be the compressor, it can be any of the pipes, it can be a simple plastic little sensor this big. If any of those things fail and the vehicle settles, it doesn't just affect the suspension, it affects the entire vehicle, especially with highly complicated vehicles like the Land Rover Discovery, the new Discovery, Range Rovers, the newer vehicles. If something goes wrong, you have got not a little problem and a major problem, and there's no escaping it. And that is why, as far as I'm concerned, there are no arguments strong enough for air suspension on overland vehicles. They're not suitable. Okay, let's get now down to vehicle makes. I'm going to start with Land Rover. If you are a Land Rover lover, you will always be a Land Rover lover. That's not true. I was obsessed with my Land Rovers, and I started driving other vehicles and saw that they could give me exactly what a Land Rover could give me. Now, you're saying, there was this world record attempt in South Africa, and it was called My Land Rover Has a Soul. That's how Land Rover, probably more than any other, but I don't exclude it from other vehicle owners of other vehicles, but that whole thing about my vehicle has a soul, my vehicle is a living being. Yes, it's temperamental, argumentative, etc., etc. It's like somebody once described it very aptly as owning a Land Rover is like having a beautiful model as a wife. She's wonderful and gorgeous, but man, is she temperamental and difficult to live with. Land Rovers, generally speaking, are quite high maintenance vehicles. And for example, I saw a brand new Defender. Took a picture of it. It had 30 kilometers on the clock. It's owned by somebody in Indonesia. And the guys at Quick Pitch are doing this build job on it with the Icarus camper conversion. They're doing a gorgeous job on this vehicle. And it had been sitting in one place for about 6-8 weeks, I guess, in the workshop, and they moved it. And when they moved it, there was this enormous pool of oil on the ground. And I looked at that and thought, only a Land Rover. There is no other vehicle on the planet, a brand new vehicle, leaking oil from its engine. And it's a Ford engine. I think Ford sells them the rejects. Anyway, so Land Rovers, generally speaking, while it's easy to have a love affair with them, they are high maintenance, as a general rule. If you are just starting out in overlanding and you're thinking that, you'd like to get into this, I think a Land Rover Discovery 1, even the 2, is probably a great choice. Because yes, they're temperamental, but spares are not, no matter where you are, you can always get not genuine spares are expensive, but lots of companies make pirate spares, good quality pirate spares, sometimes better than the original, for Land Rovers. So spares can be got most places, not enormously expensive. And is it going to go wrong? Yes. But that's the point. You're going to learn about it. They're great performers. They're great fun to own. They can be, but if you have to get somebody else to do all of your maintenance for you, you're going to find a Land Rover very expensive to own. That's the cost of owning a Land Rover. In terms of performance, off-road, we can discuss it until the cows come home. They're amongst the very best. They just are. And making a direct comparison, is it a bit better? Well, at the end of the day, it's the driver that's going to make the difference. They are as good as the best. You will love them, but be prepared to spend time and spend money keeping yours running, no matter which one it is. Toyotas are today the most popular make for overlanders in young and upcoming four-wheel drive markets like the United States. They are probably sitting at over 35 to 40% of all overlanders, even considering Jeep. It might be as much as 40%. It is definitely the highest. Second is Jeep. Why is Toyota doing well? Well, they have been quite smart in their marketing, as far as I'm concerned, the genre, the place that I'm sitting at, and I look at them and think, well, they're making vehicles that are genuinely good off-road. I mean, take the Land Cruiser 200. Very expensive vehicle, luxurious. Is it as luxurious as a Land Rover Discovery or Range Rover? No. Is it as comfortable on the open road? No. Is it as nice to drive in town and on the highway as a Range Rover? Not even in the same class. But they're not the same kind of vehicle. Even the most comfortable Land Cruiser 200 isn't as comfortable as the basic Range Rover. It's probably similar to a Discovery. But you can take them into the bush. You can take them into the wilds. The reason being is because all but the very highest specification Toyota Land Cruiser 200s they don't have electronic suspension. Thank you. They don't have airbags. They don't have these things that exclude them from being used as rugged working machines. And they've kept a lot of it simple. The suspension is quite simple, which means you can upgrade the suspension. You can't do that with a modern Land Rover. You cannot do anything to this. You cannot modify the vehicle. Modern Land Rovers are like the iPhone or iPad. You can't change the battery. You can't do anything with them. You can do nothing with them. You can hardly upgrade the tires. You have to be very careful with upgrading the tires. Insurance issues, speed ratings and all that kind of stuff. So you've got to be very careful. Whereas Toyota haven't really done that. They haven't been so finicky and kind of closed-minded like Apple is. I'm an Apple user, by the way. They're very closed-minded. They're very, very protective about their thing. Our operating system, Land Rover is very similar. And so modifying any Land Rover to any degree is tough. You basically have got the basic vehicle and you've got to live with it, and you can add a few things on top like a roof rack and things like that. But the basic chassis and everything, you can't touch it. Too many sensors, too electronic, you just can't. Toyota, even the quite expensive Land Cruiser 200, you can still do that. You can still upgrade the suspension and change the tires and give it a bit of a suspension lift if you wish to. And there are basic models, Land Cruiser 200 GX, which is not available in all countries. You can actually go quite far in doing that. And the same thing with 4Runner. Look at the FJ Cruiser. The FJ Cruiser is no longer available in the United States, but that was an off-road machine. That's what it was made for. And it was really good at it. And Hilux and Tacoma and the new Tundra just seems to be a bit moving away from that because, I don't know. The Toyota seems to be keeping things simple, and we like that because we can modify it and adapt it to our own use. And that's, I believe, the reason why Toyota is doing so well. The 70 Series Toyota, not available in most countries around the world. We're very lucky. In Africa, we've got them. Australia, we've got them. New Zealand, we've got them. Sorry, guys in New Zealand, I have forgotten you in the past about you can get Land Cruiser 70 Series V8s in New Zealand. In the Middle East, of course, 70 Series is very popular amongst tradesmen. But they're basic trucks. You can do a lot to them. Lift them and you can adapt them beautifully like I've done with my own 78. And they've kept the electronics to what is absolutely necessary. Now, it's necessary in a modern day to electronify, sorry for the word, engines to keep the emissions down. It's just part of the new world. And the 1HZ is the last Toyota motor which doesn't have an ECU, doesn't have electronic controlling its emissions. It's sold in very few countries because it doesn't meet emissions regulations. And that motor will, I don't no doubt, very soon will just no longer be available. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing because I'm interested, as well as most people, in the environment. I live in a suburb. I don't want to be breathing in horrible fumes from motor cars. I am pro clean air. So I'm happy to live with electronics in the engine, even though I can't repair it if those electronic components go wrong in an engine. I can't repair it in the bush. Can I live with that? Well, look, put it this way: on a non, 1HZ, a simple, stovetop 6-cylinder tractor engine like the 1HZ, if I have a major problem, I'm not going to be able to fix it in the bush either. Do electronics go wrong often? Well, not in cars made by Toyota, not generally speaking. Land Rovers, no, not really. My Mercedes G-Wagon, no, not really. That had electronics. So are they reliable? No. They're unreliable. They're not unreliable. So electronics aren't inherently unreliable in motor vehicles. So it's not as if you're buying an unreliable vehicle just because it's got electronics. But we have no choice. However, when the electronics control all the suspension components and all of those things that do break when conditions are very hard, I don't want that. That's when vehicles become unsuitable for overland expedition use. Other manufacturers like Mitsubishi are worth considering. They make some interesting vehicles. The L200 pickup, I thought was really quite good. I have a lot of respect for that vehicle. It's well built. The Triton I don't think is as well built as the older L200. I think the Triton, some models they still call it the L200, but I don't think the Triton is particularly well built. And what happens with these vehicles that are not particularly as well built? Really, what we're saying here is the Triton is a nicer vehicle to drive than the L200. It's got a lot going for it. Don't overload it. The L200, you could overload that vehicle and it would take a lot of punishment. And you know that by, in Africa and in the third world countries, you see less developed countries is the proper word to use now. You see L200s, quite an old ones around, and they stay together and because they're fairly well built. Not as well built, I mean, if you go into those countries and you see old vehicles, those vehicles that have lasted a long time and that are really working for their living and they're 25, 30, 40 years old, and they're knackered, they're completely battered, they're still running. They're always Toyotas. You never see a Nissan. You occasionally see a Mitsubishi. You never see a Ford. Never. You never see a Chevy. They're Toyotas. Every single one of them is a Toyota. And it's because Toyota tend to over-engineer their vehicles. They're susceptible like anybody else. You overload them and they will break. But they're just, most of them, I'm generalizing a bit here, but most of the Toyota pickups that you will find, and I don't really think this is the case with the Tacoma. I think the Tacoma is fairly lightly engineered. It's not as heavily engineered as a Hilux. And that's why these Hiluxes they just last forever. And they're beaten and battered and they're still running. And that to me is a sign. I remember meeting a chap in Botswana. He was a surveyor. He would do about 100,000 kilometers a year. And the roads in Botswana, in the less developed countries, long stretches of tar and then long stretches of brutal washboards, corrugations, and bush tracks, and he worked his vehicles hard. And every 2 years, at approximately 200,000 kilometers, he would swap his Land Cruiser and go and buy another Land Cruiser pickup. And he said to me one year that he just got so bored that he wanted to do something else. He was just, it was just no more excitement in getting a new truck anymore. It was just the same old thing. So he bought an F-150, Ford F-150 pickup. He said to me, halfway through the year, it was approaching 60,000 kilometers. He said, and this vehicle was absolutely dead. He said the engine was still running, everything else. The suspension was breaking, the bushes were worn, the gearbox wasn't working properly, the electrics started to fail. And he wouldn't carry particularly heavy loads in his vehicle either. Because I actually asked that question of him. Were you overloading it and things like that? And he wasn't. These vehicles are built for an environment, for a very, very specific environment. And in those environments, if you take them out of that environment, they don't perform well. And the F-150 Ford is not designed for Africa. It just isn't. And that was an interesting story. And he said he was less than a year and he couldn't sell it for a third of what he paid for it. He was very, very disappointed, and he said he trudged back into the Toyota dealer and said, "No, give me another Land Cruiser," and he would run them for 200,000 kilometers, and he said never have a problem with any of them. Just maintain them, and they would just run, and they were built for environment. Any of these vehicles, if you overload them, that's when you're going to have problems with them. If you think you can get away with punishing a vehicle, then there are a few vehicles you can get away with it more than others, and perhaps the Land Cruiser 70 Series is one of them. Maybe the Hilux is another one, although the new Hilux isn't as tough as the old one, maybe. The point is, if you overload and take the vehicle out of its comfort zone, it's not going to like you, it's not going to be happy, and it's going to break, and it doesn't matter what it is. Mitsubishi Pajero, the early models I thought were outstanding. I drove one for Mitsubishi on a big photo shoot. It was a 3-day photo shoot, and I was the driver, and I got to drive it extremely fast on gravel and on tar, and it first class. The model that came out in about 2000 and I guess 3, the round one, the kind of the modeled-ish on the Paris-Dakar vehicle is, I thought was a a step down in terms of performance. In fact, there's a video coming out later, my relationship with Mitsubishi, that some of you will know about. That video, that story is told, and that video will be probably released next month. But I've never thought too much about I don't think the Pajero is a particularly good, I don't think it's bad, I just don't think it's particularly good. Nissan is worth talking about. I don't have a lot of experience with Nissans. And do I think they're good? Well, to say yes or no would just be acting like fanboy. You know, do I think Nissan's good because I like the brand? Well, I've never been big on Nissan as a brand, as a user. I've never owned one. I have mixed feelings towards them. I think the Patrol, some Patrols were absolutely outstanding. Some didn't have great engines. But as a workhorse, engineering, build quality, strength, not many vehicles can match a Patrol in terms of those things. But that quality is not carried over to their other vehicles. For example, the Navara, I think, is the worst pickup built today on the readily market. And I must, you people in the United States, you must forgive me here. I haven't spent a lot of time in the United States with the US vehicle market, so I can't really talk about Dodges and the Chrysler and the Chevys and the Broncos, and I don't really know them well enough to be able to talk about them. So I apologize for that right now. Spending time in the States trying to learn more about that, but I don't really have in-depth experience of them, so I can't really share them. But if I think about the vehicles available today and pickups available today, probably one of the worst performers, the engines are quite good, but everything else is really bad, is the Navara. It's a grossly under-engineered vehicle. The number that break, the number that fail, they are horrible vehicles. I rate them extremely low. And not because they're Nissans, just because of what they are. I don't have anything against the brand Nissan. I remember driving the Terrano. The Terrano was quite a fun little vehicle. They didn't last, they fell apart. But performance-wise, they were actually a lot of fun. And I drove one on several occasions, actually, the diesel and the petrol. But I tell you what Nissan is a really good vehicle, is the little X-Trail. What a very good vehicle that is for its kind. It's not really an overlanding vehicle, doesn't have low range, but I'm just trying to give you a balance here when it comes to brand. And I'm not saying it's bad or good because it's the brand, because of what it is. Which brings me on to Jeep. Like Land Rover, Jeep only makes, actually unlike Land Rover now, I was going to say Jeep only makes one vehicle suitable for real four-wheel drive and overland, and that is of course the Wrangler based, the JK based vehicle. I was going to say Land Rover because of the Defender, but of course they no longer make the Defender, so I don't really think that Land Rover make a vehicle suitable for overland anymore because of the reasons already mentioned. But in terms of the Jeep, and one of the questions, of course, in many of my videos, reliability, and a big question mark with reliability, as it is with the Land Rover, when it comes to Jeep. How reliable are they? Well, again, I don't think Jeep is a particularly reliable vehicle. I don't think they're overly unreliable. One thing, though, in Australia, Jeep last year had more vehicle recalls than any other vehicle manufacturer in history. I can't remember the numbers, but it was astonishing how many Jeeps were recalled in Australia for issues. But Toyota have had their fair share of recalls in the past, not with their four-wheel drives, but with their saloon. So recalls are one of those things that happen occasionally to vehicle manufacturers. And so I don't know if that's really a count of, you could say, oh, it's got lots of vehicle, recalls, therefore it's unreliable. I don't think that's relevant. What I do think is relevant is how overlanders, people that use them for this kind of travel, how often do they break down? How often do they, how are the stories? On the Canning stock, we came across two vehicles that had broken down. One was a Jeep, and it had lost a wheel bearing. And the other one was a Ford Ranger that had broken a spring. Ford Ranger was a six-wheel drive, certainly six-wheel. I don't know if it was wheel drive, but it was a six-wheel conversion Ford Ranger, broken a rear spring. That vehicle looked very heavy. My guess is that it was too heavy. I didn't find the going particularly tough on the Canning stock. A vehicle wasn't heavy, and so I didn't know at time did I think this is gonna really take it out of the vehicle. Not even for a moment. There were some nasty days of washboards and things, but that was it. They broke a spring. The Jeep lost a wheel bearing because it was loaded. And one of the problems with the Jeep, again, it's taking it out of its environment. If you take it out of its environment, it's going to break. And one of the problems with that Jeep is it's got quite small wheel bearings. They're not heavy-duty wheel bearings at all. And if you demand a lot from it and you load it, now if you're a Jeep user and you load yours, have your wheel bearings replaced. Not just tightened up, replaced frequently. It's one of the weaknesses of the vehicle. Every vehicle has a weakness somewhere along the other, but it has things that we love about them. We learn to love them, the things we love. We learn to live with the things that that frustrate us. That, every vehicle has them. That's one of them with the Jeep. And so Land Cruiser 70 Series has the same problem with wheel bearings, not because of load, because of some other thing. And you've got to be very aware with wheel bearings with Land Cruiser 70 Series, and you need to replace them. And I've heard people say you should replace them at 100,000 kilometers, which might seem a lot. It's a lot for a Jeep, but it's not a lot for a Land Rover, a Land Cruiser. Land Rover Defenders don't have that problem with wheel bearings. So every vehicle has its pros and cons along the way, And if you know what they are, then you can address it and keep a vehicle running. Reliability is also in the eyes of the beholder. For some people, I've heard they'll say, my Defender is reliable. It's so reliable. It's trusty, and they use this lovely word, trusty. My trusty Land Rover. And then I dig a bit deeper. Well, what do you mean by reliable? But no, reliability means different things to different people. He said to me, no, I've done no major work on it at all. So I said, okay, you've done no major work. No, nothing at all. Have you replaced and I know some of the weaknesses of the Defender. I said, have you ever replaced the pinion oil seals in the back of the differentials? Oh, yeah. You have? Yeah. Okay, more than once? Yeah. Now, he doesn't regard that as reliable, and a reliability issue. He regards that as a maintenance issue. I've had a lot of Land Cruisers and I've never run a pinion oil seal once. I've never had oil coming out of those differentials once. Asked him about other things. It turned out that he had actually replaced a steering pump. He had replaced, he had dropped the gearbox because of an issue, and I can't remember what it was. It was quite some time ago. The point is that he'd done a lot of work. He regarded that as preventative maintenance work, or maintenance work that he'd done before a trip. Sort this out, sort this out, sort this out, sort this out. I did the same thing. I did exactly the same thing with my Land Rovers. I didn't regard them as unreliable. I now, having driven Land Cruisers for a long time, kind of have a new map. And my reliability means something completely different to what it once did. And I look at that Land Rover and I think, I'm sorry, that's unreliable. If you have to replace the steering box and it's done 40,000 kilometers and the steering box has had it, my own Land Rover Defender lost the steering box 60,000 and was completely finished. It was badly made, and some of the components are badly made, and I rebuilt it. And he doesn't regard that as reliability, he regards that as maintenance. So it's all relative. So if you're happy to work on a vehicle, then buy a Land Rover, because it's going to give you a great amount of joy if you like that particular thing. Not necessarily unreliable, just be prepared to spend more time keeping it running, and particularly an old vehicle, no matter what make it is. If it's old, it's going to require more attention than new, period. The thing is with Land Rovers, even the new ones require a lot of attention. Even the brand new ones actually require a great deal of attention. But of course the older ones, even more. Let's get on to other manufacturers. One of the questions that I get asked, what about things like the Lada Niva? Or I'm just trying to think of the other one. What's it called? A Furozo. It's a Daihatsu Furozo or something. I should know. The little four-wheel drive Jeep kind of thing. All of these lesser known cheap vehicles. The trouble is with a lesser known vehicle is that you're going to be asking questions. What about, how do I get this? Because there's not a big network of people that use those vehicles. And therefore, where are you going to get the information, and where are you going to get the spare parts, and where are you going to get the accessories that fit on those vehicles? So the simple question is, you can probably do better, because cheap sounds cheap. If it was a great idea, there would be Lada Nivas all over the place. But there aren't. And as much as the Lada Niva is a great little off-road vehicle, I've driven one off-road. It's so nimble and just able to glow anywhere like a little mountain goat. It's hideous to drive. Man, I cannot express it in words how awful it is to drive. Don't shoot me if you're a Lada owner. It's just my opinion. Comment. Andrew, you're talking nonsense. It's lovely to drive. We have a different meaning of the word lovely. Okay, that's what it's going to be. I'm asked, what vehicle would you buy if you were in the United States? And that is a very, very tough question. And I'm going to let you in on a little bit of a secret now. I'm not negotiating. I don't want to jump the gun. I am really trying to build a vehicle next year in the United States. It will be one of the turbo diesels. So it'll either be a Ford or a Dodge. I really like the look of the Fords. I think the Ranger, I think the 150, I think they're great looking trucks, particularly the Raptors. I think their design department has really, in fact, Toyota is kind of copying them. They brought out the TRD is quite an old idea when it comes to Toyotas, their off-road package for their Tundra and Tacoma, and a 4Runner. But now they're doing it with Hilux in Australia, and it looks good. They're taking some cues from Ford, I think. But the Ford Raptor 150 with the turbo diesel engine being released in the States in spring 2018 with a camper conversion on the back I'm very tempted. I've never been big on Ford. I don't think Ford make they make a bad vehicle, but I think they've had some reliability issues, and the Ford reliability issues really come from newer machines. You know, somebody buying a new machine and new Ford and it breaking down. I hear about government contracts buying a whole lot of Ford Rangers and half of them breaking down within 5 months. They're all sitting there needing spare parts and that kind of thing. And that's a bit disheartening actually, because they're priced very keenly, and I guess it's a little bit of a worry, but I really like the 150, and the Ford F-150 in the United States, of course, is regarded as a half-ton pickup, which is small. There's nothing small about it, folks, but it's not enormous. It's still not too big to do some really cool trails. And that's what I'm trying to do. So I'm not going to say any more, but that's in the pipeline, and I'm trying to, and I have some. I'm speaking to some underwriters, some sponsors who are going to help me do it. We're talking about this right now. So okay, good vibes. Send my way, please. The other, well, to wrap up really is, don't take too much notice of the Hooray Harrys, the Toyota fanboys or the Land Rover fanboys, because they will not, a true fanboy won't see the beauty in another vehicle. Your average Land Rover owner cannot possibly think it is even possible that one can love one's Land Cruiser and get the same warm fuzzy just sitting at a campsite, and you got a beer and you got a fire there, and you look over and there is your beautiful Defender. I mean, she's just gorgeous. Guys, we do. You don't have the monopoly on this. You can do it with any vehicle you like, any vehicle that you buy that gives you that great reward of an amazing experience, an amazing trip. And you look over your campsite and you look at it and you say, oh, dear. You silently say it to yourself, oh. You keep glancing at it. You can't help yourself. Land Rover, guys, it's not unique to you. It can happen with anything. Maybe not a Lada Niva. I kid. Maybe even a Lada Niva. Anything that'll give you that experience. So don't be too dissuaded by the fanboys. Only a Toyota, only a Jeep. Rubbish. It's nonsense. It's completely unreal. It doesn't matter what you get. Just get something and get out there. Thank you for watching. If you would like to be part of what I do and help me make more videos, support me on Patreon. Click the Patreon button on the screen now.